Hey, Alex, is that a virtual background or is that an actual?
That's an
Uh,
actual step and repeat.
yeah, that looks a lot nicer. You carry it around because I see you with it all the time. Every time they show you.
We use it a lot. The home off. I don't know if we're live yet or not, but the home office slash dining room got
Yeah,
flipped back to classroom setup as
right,
soon as school started. So
right.
uh,
Yeah.
sometimes I'm in the living room. Sometimes I'm just different rooms in the house. So
We are now live, everyone.
Okay.
all right.
It is right now, not everybody's falling in, so even just as a regular guest, you should be able to get.
Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the League of California Cities Latino Caucus, we want to welcome you to what we feel is a very important opportunity to hear what the 2020 election in November is all about, with many changes you've been hearing constantly over the last several months. We have two great speakers to provide us some inside information. Again, welcome. The Latino Caucus of the League of Cities has been around for quite some time, and we're actually celebrating our 30th anniversary. So we hope, as a follow-up to this, you'll follow us and continue to watch the numerous webinars and conferences and so forth that we will be holding. On behalf of the organization, I'd like to introduce our moderator for today, Fernando Guerra. He's a professor at Loyola University College. In addition to a lot of work that he does in the way of demographics, voting, Latino voters, et cetera, throughout the state of California. And he will then introduce our special guest speaker today, Secretary of State Alex Padilla. So with that, Fernando, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, John. Good morning to everyone. I really don't think I need to introduce the speaker. He's very well known. He is the Secretary of State, Alex Padilla. Let me just say this, that he has reformed that office in voting in California in the last 4 years, more so than any Secretary of State in the last 20 years. While California may not be the first one to, let's say, have universal vote by mail or online registration, we have incorporated every single reform from the nation, and I think we are the leader in all of this encompassed. And so it's to his leadership, and he's really made a name for himself, not only here in California, but nationally, as one of the leaders of political inclusion. Obviously, being Latino, being a Latino local elected official first in the city of Los Angeles, he understands that importance. He was obviously a member of the Latino caucus of the California League of Cities, went to the state legislature where he did have some significant legislation that included in the area of voting, and now a Secretary of State. So it's my honor to introduce Alex Padilla, Secretary of State, the best Secretary of State in the nation right now, and the best Secretary of State in the history of California. And no, I don't have anything before him. I'm not asking him any favors. I truly do believe that. Alex Padilla.
Well, thank you, Fernando. Thank you, John. And man, that's a big endorsement coming from Professor Fernando Guerra. So thank you, everybody, for participating here. And it's great to be back with the Latino Caucus. As Fernando mentioned, when I was on the city council in Los Angeles, obviously active with the League of Cities and an active member of the Latino Caucus and on the board before my election to the state Senate. And so definitely appreciate and understand the value of local elected officials on issues and political dynamics well beyond the official duties and responsibilities of a city council member or mayor. First, just a couple brief remarks in terms of context for what we are doing this November and why it's important and why it continues to be the most consequential election in a generation. And then I'll walk us through some of the specifics of things that are changing, what not just voters need to know to be able to participate, cast their ballots, and protect their health during this COVID-19 pandemic. But also what I'd appreciate that all of you can, understand and share. Right, as leaders in your respective communities and throughout your networks, because people turn to you for that guidance, for the information, for answers to their questions. So first, this is in some ways preaching to the choir when we say every election matters, every vote counts, every voice is important. But just to remind us of the stakes here, going back to what we all supposedly learned in our high school government class, right? From the founding of the nation, our democracy was imperfect. Who was included in the franchise, who was excluded? Many of us remember the history books and reading about the Jim Crow South, right? Literacy tests, poll taxes, etc., and how supposedly the Federal Voting Rights Act put an end to all that. But even in this day and age, we continue to see efforts to make it harder for some people to register to vote, to stay registered, or to actually cast their ballot. Not in California, in other states, but clearly those efforts, those forces are still very, very active. For me, one of the turning points in committing to a life of public service and political engagement was the era that California went through in the early to mid 90s. I think symbolized most by the passage of Proposition 187, not just the proposal of 187, but the passage of Proposition 187. A significant chapter in California history of the struggle for inclusion versus exclusion to citizenship and what it means to be a Californian and pursue the American dream. And sadly, not in California, but as a nation, we're still struggling with those same fundamental questions, those same fundamental forces. And the way that we respond historically, the way that our nation has made incremental progress historically is through civic engagement. And so as California's population is growing and increasingly diverse, so is our electorate, but it's only felt at the ballot box when people participate. So I want to lay out that historical context first. Look, coming into 2020, could have given the speech that the state of our democracy was strong. In the March primary, we had a record number of registered voters ready and able to vote. We actually saw a historic turnout in the March primary with the most number of ballots cast than in any other primary in California history. And we were building on that momentum for the November general election. And then lo and behold, COVID hit. And so that's been the first big challenge. How do we prepare a November election in a way that continues to be as accessible as possible, as secure as possible, but now in a way that's as safe as possible from a public health perspective? That was also before, by the way, the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis and the movement demanding social justice across America that we've seen this last summer, really exposing and exacerbating all the questions and concerns about inequity in education, economic opportunity, access to healthcare, environmental justice concerns, on and on and on. So again, 2020 just keeps giving us more reasons to need to make sure our community is registered and our community is ready to vote. So here's what to expect for November. Right, unlike prior elections, we decided as a state to send every active registered voter a ballot in the mail automatically. And I'm going to take a pause here before explaining the options for returning the ballot. Every active registered voter, so don't believe the lies, don't believe the false accusations that they're going out to just anybody. Only active registered voters are going to be receiving a vote by mail ballot. So what does that mean? It's a reminder to register to vote if you haven't already. So please remind your networks, remind your constituents. If they haven't registered to vote, we make it easy in California. We put all of our tools and resources, starting with online voter registration at vote.ca.gov. So jot that down for me because I'm going to be referring to it a lot. Vote.ca.gov. If you haven't registered to vote yet, register to vote today. If you're already a registered voter, we're recommending that people verify their registration status. A lot of times you register, years go by, maybe you've moved, maybe you have preferences that have changed, a political party, your vote, any of that stuff. It's always a good idea to make sure your record is up to date and current, especially your address. So as these vote by mail ballots go out, we want to make sure we send it to you at your current address. And you can do that. Verify your registration status also at vote.ca.gov. If you need to update it, go to the register to vote function and you can do it there. And the third piece of advice that we're giving to voters is to sign up for Where's My Ballot. We're going to have in-person voting options, but we're going to be promoting vote by mail as the first choice. And we have a ballot tracking tool available to all voters in California, signing up at Where's My Ballot to receive alerts by email, by text message, or by voice calls on the status of your ballot through the delivery process. So if you sign up now, you'll get the alert when the county sends you your ballot, all the way through the return end, when the county can confirm for you when they received your ballot and when your ballot was counted. So with questions and concerns about the USPS, this brings an unprecedented level of transparency to ballot traffic through the mail, and both accountability and hopefully peace of mind for the vote by mail option. So wanted to make sure to plug the registration piece in as well. So every active registered voter will receive their ballot in the mail first week of October. Counties by law have to send ballots out no later than October 5th. With many counties getting a jump start on that earlier in October. So the first week of October, check your mailbox. You have options as a voter for how to return the ballot, either by mail. I still think it's a reliable option. And California is so committed to getting people to participate that return postage is prepaid. So you don't need to scramble for stamps. Voters also have the option to take their ballot to any ballot drop box in their county in the weeks leading up to the election. So if you have doubts or hesitancy about the Postal Service, you have that option as well. Or as many people do, they receive their ballot in the mail, fill it out at home, and then they walk it into an in-person voting location, because it's important to distinguish. While we're sending every registered voter a ballot in the mail automatically, this is not an all vote by mail only election. We know there's a lot of people who need the in-person option to vote for a number of reasons, whether it's same-day registration, language assistance, a replacement ballot, you name it. So we're working with counties to ensure as many in-person opportunities to vote safely, both on and before Election Day. And frankly, I invite you to start thinking of November 3rd, not as Election Day, even though it's officially Election Day. Start thinking about it as the last day to vote, right? Because voting starts well before Tuesday, November 3rd. We're encouraging people to vote early. If you choose how you're going to vote, by mail or in person. However you do it early. When you get your vote by mail ballot, don't wait till the last minute. Fill it out, send it back with plenty of time. If you're going to vote in person, don't wait till November 3rd. Most counties are offering at least 4 days of in-person early voting. So you can go on Saturday, October 31st, or Sunday, or Monday, or Tuesday. The more people that we can encourage to vote early should translate into shorter lines, smaller crowds, and a safer experience on November 3rd. And if you vote in person, just like you can't go to the grocery store the same way anymore, the in-person voting experience is going to be different because of COVID-19. So bring your masks, look for the signage, the physical distancing requirements. You see a lot of gloves and hand sanitizer on hand, poll workers with PPE, voting equipment getting wiped down between every voter, all the things that we need to do to keep both poll workers and voters as safe as possible. But that in and of itself is one of the reasons why we're encouraging vote by mail as your first choice. A couple more comments, one on vote by mail and one on poll workers before we open it up to discussion and Q&A. For vote by mail, again, the timeline to expect the ballots in your mailbox is that first week of October. The deadline to return your vote by mail ballot, if you're mailing it back, California law says as long as it's postmarked on or before Election Day, it can arrive up to 3 days after the election and still be counted, right? If there's a delay in the Postal Service, that's not the fault of the voter. We want to make sure your vote is counted. We're extending that deadline for this election to 17 days after Election Day. With the threats and concerns about the Postal Service and potential delays, we're going to give it ample time for your ballot to arrive at the county and still be counted as long as it's postmarked on or before election day. So, plenty of time if the Postal Service is your concern, or you have the other options for returning your ballot, as I mentioned, or you have the in-person option that I've explained. And last but not least, the in-person option. We're working with counties to make sure we can identify smarter locations for voting, right? No more voting in a neighbor's garage, no more polling places at a retirement home for obvious reasons. And so we seem to be on a pretty good track in finding new, different types of voting locations in different counties, including the Staples Center and Dodger Stadium right here in Los Angeles, and other innovative spaces throughout the state. Even if we had all the voting locations that we could dream of, they're not helpful if we don't have enough poll workers. And for folks who have voted in person in the past, that senior citizens and retirees have made up a good chunk of the poll worker workforce. And they're not as available this November because we're all listening to Dr. Fauci. They're most advised to stay home. And so we do want to make an appeal, a call out. If you or anybody or through your networks, you can encourage people who are healthy and willing to sign up to be poll workers. They can go to vote.ca.gov, scroll down, click on poll worker, submit their name and contact information, and we'll connect them with their county officials because poll workers get at least three things. Number one, they get training. Number two, they'll get PPE to keep them, safe during this election. And number three, they'll get compensation. Poll workers do earn a stipend for their service. It differs by county, but it's usually around $100 per day. So if you think about, 4 days of early voting plus a training session, that can add up pretty quick for folks out there who can use a little bit of extra money. So please help us spread the word on the need for more poll workers in the state of California. So with that, I know I've covered a lot, and there's probably a lot more to cover, but let me turn it back over to Fernando for our discussion.
Thank you, Secretary of State. I wanted to find out if we wanted to have Roberto Uranga, council member from the city of Long Beach and president of the Latino Caucus, say a few words and explain the background that he has on his Zoom.
Can you hear me, Fernando?
Yes, we can.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And thank you for moderating this very important event for us today. Yes, I am Roberto Uranga. I'm the council member here in Long Beach. I represent District 7 in Long Beach. There's 9 total. And I'm also president of the League Cities Latino Caucus. And I want to also thank, of course, the secretary for being here. He has a long history with the caucus. In fact, he was a member of the Latino Caucus when he was a city councilman and for the city of LA. And I want to thank you again, Secretary Padilla, for taking the time to provide this very important information. The background that I have here is a mural. It's about 30 feet by 30 feet tall. You can't really tell, but it's in MOLA, the Museum of Latin American Art here in Long Beach. And actually, we were supposed to have our state conference here in Long Beach, and I was going to have a big event at MOLA. And but since we can't do that, I decided to take a picture here and at least share it with everybody when I do my my Zoom meetings. It's Oaxaca in nature, and it shows the contrast of actually the old with the new, the traditional with the current. And it's also, for me, being a Chicano, it's the old identity crisis issues that we always had. Are we Mexican or are we American? What are we? And so that's what this mural signifies to me. And I invite anybody, if they're ever in Long Beach, to come and visit the Museum of Latin American Art, because it's a wonderful place. It's the only art museum of its kind in the West Coast, and enjoy it. So thank you again, Fernando, Dr. Guerra, for moderating this event for us, and looking forward to some good questions from our audience.
Yeah, let me ask a couple of questions first. I know in 2018, Alex, how many absentee or vote by mail ballots were actually turned in but not counted, either because they arrived too late, the signatures couldn't be verified, etc.? What was that total?
I don't have the November 2018 figure off the top of my head, but I can tell you the March primary figures were somewhere about 170-ish thousand or so. The bulk of those were one of two things. I think about 100,000 of them little bit more than that. Simply, were either postmarked after Election Day or postmarked on time, but arrived after that 3-day extension.
Okay.
So I think by extending the time for them to arrive to 17 days after the election, a lot more of those will frankly be counted. But again, we have to emphasize to voters, it has to be postmarked on or before Election Day. The next big batch of ballots that weren't counted were ones where there was signature issues. When you vote by mail, your ballot has to come back in the official envelope that's provided to you, and you have to sign the outside of that envelope. The very first thing that county officials do is compare the signature on the envelope with the signature on file as part of your voter registration record, as part of our security measures and confirming the identity of the voter. If you forget to sign or the signatures don't match, counties are required to attempt to contact the voter to cure that issue. We want to make sure your ballot is counted. And so if you're getting phone calls or emails or any correspondence from your county registrar of voters in the days after the election, don't ignore it. They're probably trying to help you make sure your vote is counted. And so if we do a better job of reminding people about that signature requirement, we'll have even more of those ballots be counted. So those are really the two big primary reasons for why vote by mail ballots may not be counted, but we're taking measures to improve upon that for November.
Just want to reemphasize about the poll workers. Here at Loyola Marymount University, we are hosting a vote center. It'll be one of the 5-day vote centers.
Excellent.
And I am requiring my class as one of the options that they be poll workers. So more than half of them are going to take that option and actually staff. We can't, let me be gender neutral, staff the polling station. So we need young people especially to go out there. In addition, here in Los Angeles, one of the challenges we had in March was the e-poll books, where people would go and electronically people were signing in to get their ballots. And that was not only did we have Wi-Fi problems, we had also staff issues where they were not as digitally effective as the young people who are native. So we not only need young people because they're less susceptible to COVID, but also they're more digital natives and could be very helpful.
Let me add one
go ahead.
more, Fernando, and I think this caucus can appreciate it. A lot of counties pay a premium for bilingual poll workers, right? Again, reflecting the diverse electorate that we have. We're especially in need of more bilingual poll workers. So if you're a bilingual, not just the English and Spanish, it could be any other language, you're even more sought after and more needed by your county. So please sign up.
Two other major points is you keep talking about voting early, and I think we need to have people vote early. The second thing is I think we need to temper our expectations of immediate results on election day. I know we all have immediate gratification needs, especially those of us who are really into politics. We want to know who won right away, but that really puts pressure on the system. And that way, if we vote earlier, the better and the quicker we can start counting those ballots. So just a point of a clarification, if a vote by mail ballot arrives at the county office, can they count it before election day? Because I know there's some states where they're not allowed to count until the day of, and that's number one. And then number two, really a comment on, I think most of us already know who we're gonna vote for president, for U.S. House of Representatives, for state legislative office, and even for city council. What we don't know are the propositions. And we're using the 12 propositions, their complexity, et cetera, to procrastinate and wait to the last second. And so really we need some more education about that. So if you can comment on both of those things about how are vote by mail ballots counted? Are they counted right away? And then about the tempering our expectations.
Great, and I'll answer them in reverse order. The propositions, state or local, yes, sometimes you require a little bit of homework to think through how you want to vote on those. So that's another reason why you want to start planning early, not just how you're going to vote in person or by mail and what the rules are, but even doing your homework early and deciding how you're going to vote. By the way, it's maybe an intangible, unless you can quantify, Fernando, with your research, intangible benefit of universal vote by mail. It has the effect of getting sort of families and friends talking about what's on the ballot and how people are going to vote and why. Healthy, substantive civic dialogue. Heaven forbid we're encouraging that, given the political environment that we're living in. The states and counties try to provide the official information right through our voter information guides and sample ballots of, what those propositions are. A yes vote means this, a no vote means that. Clearly, you're going to be hearing from the campaigns. And even a lot of nonpartisan civic organizations provide helpful resources like the League of Women Voters and others about, how they recommend, or at least understanding what a yes vote and no vote means on propositions. So we do have to do a little homework. Democracy is not a spectator sport, but a lot of important measures on the ballot as well. High stakes in Proposition 15, the final potential, or the best chance at a reform of the old Prop 13. That can mean huge amounts of resources for local governments, especially schools. And we know schools can use some additional resources to better educate our kids. Personally, I'm very involved with Proposition 16 and 17 and 18, 17 and 18, tremendous opportunities to expand the franchise and strengthen voting rights in America. I know this caucus was active in the campaign against Proposition 209 back in 1996 that banned affirmative action. In California, voters have a chance to reverse that action with Proposition 16 this year. So just some of the examples of high stakes on the ballot, separate and apart from the presidential contest, and even separate and apart from all the other federal, state, and local officials. So yes, every election is important and every vote matters. Now with to your question about counting ballots early, or how long it's going to take to achieve results. A little bit of good news, but it's not going to be too atypical for California. Right? In California, we have this notorious reputation for why it takes so long to finish counting ballots. We have a decent sense on election night of how most races are going to turn out. But for close contests and for final numbers, it does take literally weeks in California, but for good reason. First of all, we have a lot more voters than any other state. And you'd be proud of us, Fernando, more than 21 million voters in California on the rolls. That's bigger than the population of any other state except for Florida and Texas. And so it just takes longer to count that many more ballots. But all the lengths that we go to ensure both access and security, right? The signature verification process takes a little bit longer, but we want to make sure we get the vote by mail process right. The opportunity to participate in same-day registration takes a little bit more work on the back end, but we go through those extra lengths to make sure every eligible voter can cast their ballot and have it counted. Every county is required to conduct post-election audits before we certify the results to ensure the accuracy and integrity. And so again, we have a decent sense on election night, but it takes a little bit longer for close contests. And we saw it in November 2018. Right, there were 7 House seats where one candidate was winning on quote unquote election night, and somebody else was the ultimate victor once we finished counting the ballots. So I guess the biggest lesson is election night is not results night. Right. Election night gives us an idea, but results come after. And I think the reason it's going to be a bigger issue this year is because we're going to see that increase in vote by mail and the potential longer time frame to finish counting ballots in other states for the first time. States like Michigan, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Arizona, others. And so we have a likelihood that the presidential contest may be too close to call on election night. And what do we do in the days after? Right, we know a certain somebody is going to be either claiming victory with still a lot of ballots to be counted, right, or spewing conspiracy theories and lies about what's going on. That's not a time to panic. That's a time to be patient and trust the process at work. It's very, very transparent. And in terms of trying to anticipate all that and let counties get ready earlier, it's an important distinction. We do allow counties to begin processing ballots, but not necessarily counting the votes or tabulating the votes. By processing, we mean we're giving them an earlier start date to be able to conduct that, signature verification process for vote by mail,
Okay.
start opening those envelopes, sorting ballots to be ready to be run through tabulators. But they still have to wait till the polls close on election night to start counting and reporting
Oh,
any
wow. So they
preliminary
can't even
results.
start counting on election day, like a minute after midnight. They have to wait until 8 o'clock to start counting.
Right. So they started doing the first batches. That's
And
why
now,
by
is that a
8:50
state law or a federal law? So you could change that
it's
if
state.
you wanted to? Okay.
It's state law, and via executive order and legislation, we've given them now 4 weeks to begin processing those early ballots
Right.
that come in. But no preliminary numbers are reported until after 8:01 on election day. Other states, no, they can't even touch the ballot until 8:01.
Right.
So I think
Right.
Michigan is going to take a little bit
Correct,
longer than people
exactly.
were hoping for.
So let me make one more comment and then open it up to other questions. In terms of when I take a look at the elections, in terms of the type of work that you do, I put it into 3 categories. One is expanding the inclusiveness and making it even more open. 2 is the experience and improving the actual voting experience, and we talked a little bit about that. And then 3 is the role of turnout and what role can the state play. And so in terms of expanding, we talked about it already. There's very little areas where California is behind, but one of them is the felons. It's not in the US Constitution. There's actually 2 states in the United States that allow people in prison to vote. It's a state law, and you are endorsing Proposition 17. You also mentioned Proposition 18, and then Proposition 16, the repeal of affirmative action, which, by the way, since this is a lot of local elected officials, I consider it a local control initiative. Because what it does, it doesn't force you to have affirmative action. It lets the cities decide on a local level what they want to do. But there is a question about why are you, as Secretary of State, endorsing initiatives? You are the official elections official. It shouldn't be a nonpartisan office. We know you're obviously a Democrat. You ran as a Democrat. You're head of the Democratic Secretary of States nationwide. What's your response to that you should be more of a neutral player, not endorse candidates, not endorse propositions, and really even change the office to be a nonpartisan office like insurance commissioner or superintendent of public instruction, excuse me. So, talk about the role of Secretary of State as a neutral arbiter.
Yeah, no, and look, that's a fair question. And in part, the stage was set by some of my predecessors, including my most immediate predecessor, Secretary of State Deborah Bowen. That was just her policy of never endorsing in an election. So if there was a close call that she needed to make, she people didn't view her as maybe being biased. But look, I adopt that for most contests. I'm not trying to endorse in every race or in every proposition, but as a citizen of California, I believe I have my First Amendment rights too. And if there's a particular race or measure that I believe reaches a certain threshold as being that important for the future of our state, I have a right to voice my opinion. I can certainly wear 2 hats. If I'm out there politicking for an issue or a candidate, I can do that. But when it comes time to doing my day job, I can certainly do that with integrity. And to use a baseball analogy, I have my favorite baseball team, but I know that the strike zone is a strike zone, and I can call balls and strikes when I need to. So I think that's where I draw a little bit of a distinction. And again, I haven't endorsed in every proposition, but Propositions 17 and 18 in particular, because they deal with elections and voting rights, I think it is important for the public to know what the Secretary of State thinks. And Prop 16, of course, one of a matter of fairness and social justice.
There are 2 more questions in the chat that I'm going to read. And then, John, do you want people to ask questions on the chat, or do you want to call on them? And you can decide that while I give these 2 questions to the Secretary. One is, what is the definition of an active registrant? Who is active, et cetera? And then the second one is, what's the process for naturalized citizens to register to vote, especially if they're they've just become citizens and they're registering for the first time? Is there a different process?
Yes, great. And again, I'll answer them in reverse order because the second one is a little bit quicker. For newly naturalized citizens, upon taking that oath of citizenship, they are immediately eligible to register and to vote. So even if their naturalization ceremony was on election day, they should go straight from that ceremony to their voting location and register and cast their ballot. Obviously, if it's in the days leading up, one of two options. If the ceremony is in the next several days, plenty of time to register online, get your ballot in the mail, all that stuff. The closer to election day it gets, your safer option may be to go vote early or go vote on election day. But the moment you take the oath of citizenship, you're immediately eligible to register and vote, and California accommodates that through same-day registration. For the remind me the first part again.
What's the definition of an active registrant? In other words, you said that vote by mails are going to be sent to everybody except those who are not active registrants. What is that?
Right. So I appreciate the question. That means somebody was paying attention, and we use those words precisely for a reason. So just to give you an idea, if federal law, the National Voter Registration Act, allows local jurisdictions, if there's a voter that hasn't shown up for a few years to vote, counties usually try to attempt to contact that voter to see if they're still there, frankly, right? Has the person moved on, maybe moved somewhere else in California or out of state? Why keep sending that voter mail there if they're no longer there? And so it allows counties to move that voter from an active status to an inactive status. They're still technically on the voter rolls, but they're not getting the mail. Their name may not be on the roster if they go vote in person. That's maybe one of the reasons why somebody may have to vote provisionally. Right? If they vote provisionally, the ballot comes back, they look that voter up like, oh, okay, well, I guess let's reactivate them, but count that ballot. It's part of what we do to try to make sure the lists are as accurate and up to date as possible. So that's why we say ballots are only going out to every active registered voter. It also is the answer to when the president falsely claims that they're sending ballots to just anybody, including pets and whoever else. No, it's not true. Only active registered voters are receiving ballots, and it's why we're recommending, if you are registered to vote already, verify your registration status. That simple process of checking, and even if your address is still current and you haven't voted in a few years, we've programmed it so verifying your registration status reactivates your registration. So it'll make sure to get all the materials, your name's on the roster if you go vote in person, all those sorts of things. If too much time goes by, the counties may cancel your registration if you haven't shown up, haven't responded to their attempts to contact you. But that's the distinction or definition of active registered voter.
Mm-hmm. So, one of the main learning objectives I have in my class, I'm actually teaching a campaign and elections class today, is the degree to which elections in America are fragmented. We don't have one election system. We have 51, the 50 states and DC, and there are no two states that run elections the same way. Further, we actually have then the counties implement a lot of this. So we have 58 counties in California, and the experience of voting is different in many of them. Can you kind of describe that landscape? And then kind of a follow-up question is the active registrant defined differently by county, or is that a statewide definition? Was a follow-up question.
Yeah, no, the active registrant is relatively consistent across the country, actually, because the process of list maintenance is defined in federal law, the National Voter Registration Act. But you're right, Fernando, every state's a little bit different, and that's thanks to our U.S. Constitution, where that formally delegates authority over elections to the states. And then within each state, right? California has 58 counties. Counties have the option of selecting, for example, the voting systems that they believe best fits their needs. We have big urban counties, small rural counties, and everything in between in California. So, I've seen ballots where in one county it could be filling in a bubble, in another county it's sort of connecting an arrow. In some counties the sheets are pretty big, others it's more legal paper size, and everything in between. So the most important pieces for every particular voter, to know what the rules are, what their systems and options are, and that the core fundamental policies over how we maintain elections that are accessible and secure, and obviously now safe during COVID, are being met. The accessibility piece applies everywhere, right? Online voter registration, automatic registration, same-day registration, pre-registration, et cetera. Your options for voting by mail, early in person, increasingly the vote center option in more and more places in California. Those apply broadly. The technical infrastructure may be a little bit different from county to county, but the core principles are intact.
Yeah.
Secretary
go ahead, John.
Padilla. Okay, I know your time is short, so I don't want to keep you much longer. And just so the audience knows that after the secretary has left, Fernando Guerra and Roberto Uranga will stay on for a little bit to have a discussion and answer any other questions. But two questions that were sent to us early on before the webinar started is one. How can you best inform citizens about their location for dropping off ballots and voting on the day of? And then the other question that we received was, what can city leaders, as you know, we've got many mayors and council members on this call, do to encourage voting in their districts or their communities?
Yeah, that's great. So look, and the very reason I said yes to this invitation when they came in, not just because John Arriaga has been a friend for more than 20 years. Look, as local leaders, it's incumbent, as part of representing your district and advocating for your community, you want to make sure that the election is accessible for all of them as well. So if you have city facilities that can be used as voting locations, right, then push your city to do that. A lot of times counties run into, well, this community center would be great, or this recreation center would be great, but the city manager or somebody else may not be enthusiastic about it, or they get haggling over, well, are you going to pay us or not, et cetera. As city leaders, you can push for more facilities in the communities need that improved access. And you can help recruit the poll workers so that, that in-person option is truly available for everybody who needs it. And look, through governing and through campaigning, you guys have your networks, your followers, who the community leaders are that can help spread the word on the voting options and recruiting poll workers, et cetera. Some of what we will do, once somebody's registered, they get the state's voter information guide with all the material that comes in that. They get the county sample ballot with all the materials and information that comes with that. As far as knowing what the locations are for either ballot drop boxes or voting locations, by mid-October, we will have uploaded into our state website, vote.ca.gov. It's no longer just finding your polling place, right? Doing the search is now, what are the drop boxes and voting locations closest to me? Your county will also be communicating that out directly to voters. Thanks to the legislature and the governor, despite the tough budget this year, they did appropriate about a $30 million budget for a statewide advertising campaign. So my office is working with folks to do television, radio, newspaper buy, social media campaigns, other digital outreach efforts to let people know what their options are. And another great tool is not very revolutionary, but it's revolutionary for us. We developed the ability to email every voter that we have an email address for direct information from the Secretary of State to the voter. And so 21 million voters on the rolls, but we only have email addresses for about 7 million of them. So as people are verifying their registration status, we encourage them to add an email address too, so we can get direct updates or announcements to the voters in real time between now and Election Day.
Okay. Great, we appreciate that. I'm going to let Roberto, if you'll say a few words before the secretary leaves, and then
he looks like he's dancing or something going on there.
He's showing off his face.
And I do have one more question for the secretary after the council member.
Okay.
Go ahead, Council Member Uranga.
Again, I want to thank the Secretary Padilla for being here today. I'm sort of multitasking. I'm going to show you where I'm at. It's
I'm not sure we want to know, but go ahead.
Oh yeah, we're doing COVID testing here in Long Beach.
Okay.
And if you could see.
No, we can't. You still have your screen. You have to remove your.
Eliminate the screen. I see.
Roberto, we can't see or hear you. Oh, there we go. COVID testing. There you go. Perfect. All right.
All right. Fernando, what's that last question?
So here's my last question for you, Secretary of State. Let's make the assumption that former Vice President Biden wins.
I don't know if you can hear me, but
oh yes, Roberto, go ahead.
Being challenged here.
Okay. Thank you, Roberto. We're going to ask the secretary one more question. Let's make the assumption that Biden wins, and then obviously U.S. Senator Kamala Harris becomes vice president. She would have to resign her U.S. Senate position on January 20th. The governor would then have to make an appointment. He doesn't have to. He could actually call an election or what have you. But how many days does he have to appoint his replacement? And then what is that process like? And then do you have a favorite candidate for that position?
I appreciate the question, Fernando. And as a demonstration that I am like laser focused on November, I don't know how many days he has, but I know that's the process, right? Mm-hmm. Assuming Vice President Biden wins, a vacancy is created on January 20th, and then the governor has a window of time to appoint to fill that vacancy. So it's not a special election traditionally, and it's not vacant for years until the next regular election the governor would appoint. So look, I think it's time for a Latino. We represent the biggest population in the state of California, Mortgage State. There's never been a Latino U.S. Senator from California. So I think it's time. But for me, to have a favorite candidate, you know the answer to that. But there's a lot at stake this November, a lot of challenges being thrown at us. So pardon me. Sorry, not sorry for being focused on November. Before we go, I did want to make a plug for our voter hotline. You know, I've been plugging the website a lot, vote.ca.gov, all the tools and resources you need in one location. We do set up a voter hotline in advance of every election, so people can call English or Spanish with questions, concerns, report problems about their experience at 1-800-345-VOTE.
Okay. Hey, we know it's an incredibly busy time, especially everything that's going on. We greatly appreciate you giving us these 45 minutes. John, did you want to finish up with the secretary, and then we'll continue with some other stuff?
Secretary, as always, thank you so much for your attention you give this organization. Thank you for your leadership, and I wish you the best.
All right. Thank you, everybody. 41 days.
Yeah, okay. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Padilla.
Thank you.
We wanted to focus a little bit more on the elections, and I wanted to turn it back over to John to see how I have a lot of notes. I'm a professor. I can actually speak for 3 hours, but John, how did you want to handle this with Roberto or myself? Go ahead.
We've got about 10 minutes to go, so I think this is a good opportunity to have an open discussion. So I'll let Roberto and you.
Okay.
Yeah, if I'm going to have to actually leave now because we've got media here for the COVID testing.
Okay.
So, but I appreciate that, Fernando, your presence and your opportunity to do a very important work that we need to get the vote out, and the important information that you gave to the audience. So again, I want to express my gratitude and thank you for being here. John, good job. And we'll talk again soon. Thank you all. And thank you all to all of you who participated in this webinar. I hope it was meaningful and very informative. I'm signing off. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Council Member. Let me just go ahead.
Just for a minute, Fernando, why don't you talk a little bit about the importance of the Latino vote, for this year, and the numbers are certainly there. I know we've always been commented on as we don't vote and so forth, but share a little bit on that as far as.
Sure. It's interesting. So the question is, what is the role of Latino vote? And actually in today's New York Times, there's an opinion piece from Linda Chavez. Linda Chavez has been around, she's very conservative, ran as a Republican, was pretty much a far-right political figure. She's moderated quite extensively. She's actually now one of those never Trumpers. Like a lot of former Republicans, but the title of her opinion piece in today's New York Times is "You Cannot Count on the Latino Vote," and there's a variety, and she really focuses more on Florida and Texas and those states, not necessarily California. Number one, more Latinos will vote in November than ever in the history of California. The absolute, not the percentage, but the absolute turnout of Latino voters is going to go through the roof. Just because of simple numbers and demographics and registration and what's happening, there are more Latino voters than ever before. In every single one of your cities, there will be more Latino voters by far. That's not a debate. We have that quantified. We will be able to quantify that at the end. It's very direct. And obviously, number two, here in California, they are more and more heavily Democratic. That's not necessarily the case nationally, and I think Linda Chavez's comment is about that. You know, in Florida, you still have a lot of diversity amongst the Latino community, Puerto Ricans more in the Tampa Bay area, Cubans and Venezuelans and Nicaraguans down in Miami. And then same in Arizona and Texas, there's still a lot of conservative Mexican Americans. And so you see that. While we do have tremendous diversity here in California, over 80% of Latino voters are still of Mexican origin, and very much from that perspective. One of the questions that that was asked, what can cities do to increase turnout, is also kind of a question in general to the Secretary of State. It is the history of America and California and many of our cities that the formal government, meaning the city, the state, or the federal government, not get involved in the mobilization of the electorate. Yes, we are to inform the electorate. And I think there was a question about why Secretary Padilla endorsing initiatives in it. And it comes from that attitude and perspective, which is very strong in America and has served us quite well. But it also has, I think, greatly impacted turnout. And so we have no great mobilizing institutions. We expect the political party to do that, but it doesn't. And I don't want to go into a whole reason why it doesn't do that. Unions try to do that. You know, the media tries to do it, but it's back and forth. And so there's a lack of mobilizing institutions. And I believe that the state and the city has to step in, not in terms of endorsing, but in creating the environment for greater turnout. So let me give you one example. I feel very strongly about this. Is there's constantly this thing this view about Latinos not turning out, that it's cultural, that it's not the institutions. Nothing could be further from the truth. The typical presidential turnout in Latin America is higher than in the United States. From the 50s through the 80s and 90s, if Puerto Rico were a state, it would have a higher turnout than more than half the states, okay? And so when people say it's cultural, nothing could be further from the truth. In their native lands, Latinos vote at a higher rate than the typical American does, okay? And the best example is Puerto Rico. Why does a Puerto Rican, and why do Puerto Ricans vote at a high rate in Puerto Rico? Then they move to New York or Tampa and their participation drops tremendously. A lot of it has to do with the electoral rules and electoral laws, absolutely. And then number two is a cultural or the election culture, in that these become events. So what I'm suggesting is that we should be having cultural events, and I don't mean Latino cultural events, but voting events, voting parties. Obviously in the pandemic, we can't do that, but in terms of Zoom. So I personally have done at least 5 presentations about the propositions to try to prevent that as being an obstacle. And so I just did one on NPR and KPCC, and I'll send that to you, John, so you can send it to others. Cal Matters has a long list. We need to educate people about these propositions, because I really do think that that is what's holding things back. So city officials can create these information forums and even use city resources, as long as they're not endorsing, but informing, to create these forums and create this culture of voting. Obviously, the greatest impact for cities now is many cities are changing their elections from off year or odd year elections to even years, and that's going to make a big difference for you. All the data shows that it hasn't impacted the knowledge of individuals about city elections, has actually increased it. Like I mentioned, I've been lecturing on this for the past 3-4 weeks in my class. I can go on, but I'll stop there. And thank you, John, for having me. If there's any other questions, you know, we got a couple of minutes, but it's been a pleasure to be involved. I also think that as the Latino caucus, and as having Alex Padilla as a former member, that it would be appropriate for this caucus to write a letter to the governor immediately after the election, endorsing Alex Padilla for that appointment for U.S. Senate position. John, I'll turn it back over to you.
Well, as always, Fernando, thank you so much. You've always been a close partner to this organization for years and years, so we greatly appreciate that. I think you did a fantastic job with moderating of this, and in fact, you've given me a couple of ideas for some more immediate webinars that I hope you'll make yourself available to.
Oh, absolutely.
Before we leave, I want to tell the audience that if this was recorded, if you have people that would like to see it, tell them to go to our website at cacitiesLatinoCaucus.org. You can pick this up there and other information. I also want to put a plug in for a couple of events we have coming up in conjunction with the League's annual conference. October 7th, we have a session on a workshop on apprentices and how they might affect and benefit your community. We have our first, as many, virtual networking events that we would normally have at the conference. We will have one on October 7th at 4 p.m. And finally, we have a business meeting on October 8th at 12:45 p.m. And for those of you interested in more information about the caucus, it's a great opportunity to listen to some of the leaders within our organization. So I suggest you you go to our website, sign up, and hopefully we'll see you again soon. Thank you for all your participation and hope to talk to you again soon. Thank you.